In Cape Thorne, a fog-shrouded fishing town on the North Atlantic coast, a marine liens investigator was about to pay 25 cents for her own grave. What started as a routine tax auction took a chilling turn when she discovered what lurked beneath the dock, a barnacle-armored trawler that locals refused to name. A boat that had come back wrong. June Mercer wasn't your typical salvage consultant. For 8 years, she had spent her life untangling the legal mess of abandoned vessels and maritime fraud for a Boston law firm, known for her stubborn refusal to let paperwork bury the truth. She'd walked away from that career after watching one whistleblower case too many disappear into settlements and silence. When she encountered the Nightjar moored in the sub-cellar shadows, its hold sealed, its black box still recording, its deck maintained by a grieving mother who knew her son's drowning was murder, she had no idea she was being engineered into a trap. June's decision to board that boat, to claim legal ownership, to fight corporate fixes with salvage, law and fog machinery would lead to a federal investigation that would crack open 14 months of corporate silence. What began as a quarter's gamble on expensive splinters would become a reckoning. Cape Thorne would never be the same after one outsider proved that small debts could open massive doors, and that sometimes courage isn't heroism. It's just refusing to let the truth drown alongside the dead. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I paid 25 cents for a dock, and everyone in the county clerk's office looked at me like I'd just purchased my own grave. The auction had been perfunctory. Cold February morning in Cape Thorne's municipal building, radiators clanking, 4 bidders for 17 parcels of tax-delinquent property. Most were inland lots. Scrub pine and ledge rock nobody wanted. When Lot 14 came up, Municipal Dockner 7, Harrow Point, assess value undetermined. Minimum bid 25 cents. The room went quiet in a way that made my investigator's instincts prickle. I raised my hand. The clerk, a woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain, blinked. "You're bidding on the Harrow Point dock?" 25 cents, I confirmed. She looked past me as if someone might object. No one did. The other bidders studied their auction sheets with sudden intensity. One man, a contractor in Carhartt coveralls, gathered his papers and left, sold to bidder. 17 for 25 cents. Her voice had gone flat, professional. "See me after to complete the transfer. Wendy." I approached her desk 20 minutes later. She had the deed ready. Her fingers trembled slightly as she notarized my signature. "You got yourself some expensive splinters, Miss Mercer," I smiled. "At a quarter, I'll take my chances." She didn't smile back. She slid the deed across the desk, but when I reached for it, she didn't let go immediately. Her eyes met mine for the first time. "There's a reason nobody bid against you. I assumed structural issues." "What storm damage? It's sound enough." She released the deed. "Cape Thorne maintains what it owns, even when it pretends not to." Then she looked away, and I knew I wouldn't get more from her. Outside, the fog pressed against Cape Thorne like a living thing. It turned the harbor into a study in grey water, grey sky, grey wooden buildings hunched against the Atlantic wind. I'd driven 3 hours from Portland for this auction, following a tip from a former colleague who specialized in maritime liens. "Something weird in Cape Thorne," he'd said. "Dock going for nothing. Might be salvage rights attached." "You're good at weird." I was good at weird. I'd spent 8 years investigating marine liens for a big firm in Boston, tracking down abandoned vessels, researching ownership claims, untangling the legal mess of boats that outlived their owners. I was good at paperwork and persistence. I was good at not being scared off by fishermen's superstitions and harbor politics. What I wasn't good at was knowing when a 25-cent dock was bait. The GPS led me down a rutted access road that dead-ended at a chain-link gate. A hand-painted sign read, "Private, Harrow Point Dock, no trespassing." Someone had spray-painted over private in red. "Town property, do not board." I used my new key, the one the clerk had given me with the deed, to unlock the gate. The dock revealed itself through veils of fog. It extended perhaps 80 feet into the harbour, built from massive timbers, dark with creosote and slick with salt. The planking looked solid, despite the warnings about splinters. The pilings were twice as thick as modern docks required, a barnacle-armored below the tide line, and beneath the dock, lurking in the shadow of those pilings, like something that had crawled up from deep water, was a boat. Not just any boat, a trawler. 40 feet of rust-streaked hull, cabin windows dark, working deck piled with tangled net and gear. The name on the bow had been painted over, but I could still read the ghost letters underneath. Nightjar. I walked slowly down the dock. The wood creaked under my boots, but it didn't flex. Solid, like the clerk had said. Cape Thorne maintained what it owned. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, intending to photograph the trawler, but the screen glitched. Sonar app I used for hull surveys, flickering through screens I hadn't opened. The depth reading pulsed. 12 feet, 47 feet, 12 feet, error 12 feet. Interference from the pilings, maybe. Or something else. I put the phone away and kept walking. At the dock's midpoint, bolted to a piling at eye level, was a brass plaque so new it still had the hardware store price sticker on the back. The engraving read, "Property of Cape Thorne, do not board. Fresh bolt holes. Installed recently." After the auction was scheduled, probably. Before anyone showed up to claim the dock, someone wanted to make sure whoever bought this dock knew to stay away from the Nightjar, which meant someone knew I was coming. I completed my circuit of the dock, making mental notes. The mooring cleats were over-engineered, rated for vessels 3 times the Nightjar's size. The electrical box was padlocked, but the cables were live. I could hear the faint hum of current, and at the far end, half hidden by a coil of rope, was a ladder leading down to what looked like a sub-cellar hatch built into the piling structure itself. When I returned to the gate, I found something I'd missed on the way in my coat pocket. Wrapped in a length of tar-black net twine was a key ring I hadn't put there, 3 brass keys, old worn smooth with use. No tags, no labels, just keys that had appeared in my pocket between the parking area and the dock. I stood there holding them, fog condensing on my glasses, and thought about the clerk's words. Cape Thorne maintains what it owns, even when it pretends not to. Someone had planted these keys. Someone wanted me to find whatever those keys unlocked. That's when I heard the growl, low, steady, coming from somewhere off the dock's shoulder. I turned slowly. A dog sat at the edge of the gravel turnaround. Medium-sized, rough-coated, the kind of mixed breed that haunts working harbors, part lab, part shepherd, part something that looked like it had survived by its wits. One ear stood up, the other flopped. Its eyes were locked on the Nightjar. "Easy," I said. The dog ignored me. Its growl deepened, lips pulling back from yellowed teeth. But it wasn't looking at me. It was looking at the boat. Then suddenly it stopped growling. It turned those mismatched eyes on me, stood and walked directly to my side, sat like it had made a decision. "You belong to someone?" I asked. The dog leaned against my leg. I looked down at the keys in my hand, then back at the Nightjar. The fog shifted, and for just a moment I thought I saw light in one of the cabin windows. But when I blinked, there was only darkness and barnacles, and the smell of cold water. The dog nudged my hand. "All right," I said. "Show me." The dog led me back up the access road, past my parked Subaru, onto a footpath I'd missed. The path wound between stacks of lobster traps and a listing boat shed, emerging at a weathered shack built against an outcropping of granite. Smoke rose from a metal chimney. A cod net hung from the eaves, mended in places with twine so new it was still white. On the porch, in a chair that looked older than the shack, sat a woman with hands like gnarled driftwood and eyes the color of winter Atlantic. She was waiting for me. "You must be the one who bought the dock," she said. "June Mercer." "I know." She stood, unfolding from the chair, with the careful economy of someone who'd worked on boats their whole life. "I'm Agnes Vale. I keep what the town pretends it doesn't own. The dog, Gull, she called it, curled up on the porch like it lived there. "Come inside," Agnes said. "We need to talk about what you really bought for 25 cents. Agnes's net shed was a museum of salt and memory. The walls were dense with hooks, rusty, salt-pitted, arranged in sizes from thumbnail to fist. Fishing nets draped from the rafters like frozen waterfalls, their mending visible in patches of newer twine. Photographs covered every vertical surface that wasn't hooks. Black and white images of trawlers and crews, Polaroids of children holding cod. Newspaper clippings yellowed to the color of old bruises. Agnes poured tea from a pot that lived on a wood stove. The tea was dark as diesel fuel and tasted like it had been steeped with anchor chain. She handed me a chipped mug without asking if I wanted any. "You're wondering why nobody warned you," she said. "I'm wondering why someone wanted me here." Agnes smiled. It wasn't a happy expression. "Same thing." She settled into a chair made from a ship's wheel and a tractor seat. I took the stool by the stove. Gull watched us both from the doorway. "The Harrow Point dock," Agnes began, "has been abandoned for 14 months. That's the official story. Structural concerns. Insurance liability. The town voted to auction it off rather than pay for an engineering assessment. But the electrical was updated 6 months ago. The pilings were reinforced last spring. And I've been keeping the Nightjar pumped and sealed since the night she came back." I set down my mug. "Came back from where?" Agnes stood and walked to the wall of photographs. She touched one. A young man in his 20s, red watch cap, holding a haddock and grinning at the camera. Same eyes as Agnes, same set to the jaw. My son, Noah. He crewed on day boats mostly. Lobster runs, scallop dredges, whatever paid. 14 months ago, he signed on for a 3-day trip on the Nightjar. She was owned by a man named Carver, dead now. Heart attack in his truck, who did special contracts for Perigi Fisheries. The seafood conglomerate, the same. Agnes's finger traced the edge of the photograph. The Nightjar left on a Tuesday. Wednesday night, the harbormaster logged a distress call. Static, broken transmission. Something about a net foul and engine trouble. Then nothing. Coast Guard searched for 5 days. Found nothing. She turned back to me. 2 weeks later, the Nightjar came back. The way she said came back made the hair on my neck stand up. Came back how? Tied herself to the Harrow Point dock at dead low tide, middle of the night. Carver's body was in the wheelhouse. "Stroke," the coroner said, though his face looked like he'd seen something that stopped his heart. The hold was sealed. The cabin was locked. And Noah, her voice didn't waver. Noah wasn't aboard. I waited. Agnes poured more tea. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like it was listening. Coast Guard impounded the boat for investigation. Found nothing wrong with the engines, nothing to explain the distress call. Official report called it a tragic accident. Carver had a stroke. Noah must have gone overboard trying to get help. Case closed. Perigi Fisheries sent a grief counselor and a check for $5,000. But you don't believe that. Agnes's laugh was sharp as broken shell. I don't believe Carver tied perfect clove hitches while dying of a stroke. I don't believe a sealed hold and a locked cabin happened by accident. And I don't believe the town suddenly discovered structural concerns with a dock that had stood for 60 years, forcing the Nightjar into a legal limbo where nobody could touch it. She pulled something from her apron pocket, a folded piece of paper, creased from handling. She passed it to me. It was a text message, printed out. Timestamp 11:47 p.m., the night of the distress call. A blurred photo of what looked like a ship's hold. Dark water, something pale and massive, hanging in cargo netting, too distorted to identify. And a message, "Call Coast Guard, bycatch pen." "This isn't right," from Noah, Agnes said. "Last thing he sent me." I studied the photograph. The quality was terrible, pixelated and motion blurred, but I could make out details. Metal bars, industrial-scale netting, and something in the water that looked too large, too wrong. What's a bycatch pen? Exactly what it sounds like. Temporary holding for specimens caught accidentally in nets. Supposed to document and release protected species, except Perigi doesn't release. They bury. Agnes took the paper back and refolded it along its worn creases. The Nightjar was doing special work for Perigi. Deep runs, Trench systems where you're not supposed to fish. They paid Carver under the table to test harvest methods and keep his mouth shut. But Noah saw something in that hold, something Perigee was supposed to report and didn't, and he was going to blow the whistle. And then the boat disappeared, I said slowly, and came back with Carver dead, and Noah gone and everything sealed up tight. And then the town suddenly needed to auction the dock for liability reasons, Agnes finished. But not before someone made sure the Nightjar stayed exactly where she was, moored, maintained, waiting. Waiting for what? Agnes looked at me like I was being deliberately dense. Waiting for someone from outside. Someone with salvage experience and a taste for complicated paperwork. Someone who'd bite on a 25-cent lien and ask questions instead of listening to small-town gossip about bad luck boats. The pieces clicked into place. You're saying I was engineered? The auction, the price, the whole setup. Someone wanted an outsider to claim this dock. Someone wanted an outsider to verify what's on that boat, Agnes corrected. To get aboard legal-like, with a deed and a right to inspect. Because if the evidence is still down there, the black box logs, the specimen data, whatever's in that sealed hold, then someone needs to make it official before Perigee makes it disappear. And you think I'm that someone? Agnes smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. I think you paid 25 cents for a lot more than a dock, June Mercer. I think you paid 25 cents for a chance to prove my son died trying to do the right thing. And I think whoever set this trap knows you're the kind of fool who won't walk away once you see what's down there. She was right about that. I'd left a big firm in Boston after watching them bury a whistleblower case. I'd watched lawyers smooth over environmental violations with settlements and NDAs. I'd sworn I'd never let paperwork be used as a weapon against truth again. Agnes was reading my face. You're thinking this is crazy. You're thinking harbor superstition and conspiracy theories. I'm thinking this is extremely illegal and probably dangerous. It's both. Agnes stood. But it's also real. And we're running out of time. Why now? Because Perigee knows someone finally bought the dock. They know the legal limbo is over, which means they'll be coming to clean up loose ends before you get too curious. She walked to the door. Best you see it before they do. She pulled a brass key from her pocket, twin to the ones I'd found in mine, and held it up to the grey light. The dock has secrets under secrets, Agnes said. Surface and subsurface, come on. Low tide won't last forever. Gull was already on his feet. Heading for the path, I followed because Agnes was right about one thing. I was exactly the kind of fool who wouldn't walk away. Not from a 25-cent dock, and definitely not from a boat that came back wrong. The sub-cellar hatch was where I'd spotted it earlier, half hidden by coiled rope at the dock's far end. Agnes moved the rope aside like she did this regularly, because she did, I realized. Whatever was down there, she'd been maintaining it. The hatch was wooden, swollen with salt and time, but the hinges were oiled. It opened without sound. Beneath it, a ladder descended into darkness that smelled of kelp and cold stone, and something else. Something mechanical and waiting. Agnes handed me a waterproof LED lantern. Watch your footing! These rungs are older than both of us. This isn't part of the original dock construction, I said, peering down. No, this is older. Smuggler's cash, back when Cape Thorne made money off ships that didn't want the harbour master asking questions. Agnes started down the ladder without hesitation. Town's been hiding things under things for 200 years. We're just adding to tradition. I descended after her. The ladder was slick with spray, bolted into living rock. My breath fogged in the beam of my lantern. Above us, the planking of the dock formed a low ceiling. Below, the water lapped at stone 8 feet down. A chamber carved or eroded into the granite piling's foundation. At the bottom of the ladder, a narrow ledge ran along the chamber's perimeter, and built into the far wall, sealed with rust-bleeding metal plating, was a door. Agnes produced her brass key. They bricked over the original entrance in the 60s. But Carver knew about this chamber. He paid to install this door and the gangway beyond. Told the town it was for maintenance access. Really? He wanted a way to get aboard the Nightjar without being seen from shore. Why would he need that? Because some catches aren't meant to be logged. Agnes turned the key. The lock resisted, then surrendered with a grinding click. And some boats do work that benefits from privacy. The door swung inward. Beyond it, a gangway extended through a gap in the pilings. A tunnel of barnacle-gritted wood and metal grating, barely wide enough for a person walking sideways. The sound of water echoed differently here, contained and rhythmic. The breathing of something large. We moved through the gangway. My shoulders brushed both walls. The lantern light skittered across marine growth and rusted bolts. Then the gangway opened, and we were standing on a hidden ledge next to the Nightjar's hull. This close, the trawler was massive. 40 feet of working boat, riding low in the water, tied to a cleat system built into the sub-cellar's structure. The hull was intact, professionally maintained, despite the coat of barnacles and weed. A boarding ladder hung from the starboard rail just within reach. "She's flooded," I asked, noting the waterline. "Sealed and pumped," Agnes said. "I've been keeping her stable. Coast Guard released her after their investigation, but the insurance company wouldn't move her without ownership clarity. So she sits, maintained by a woman nobody pays to care. Well, why do you?" Agnes looked at me. "Because my son died trying to expose something, and this boat is the only witness left. Because if I stop caring, perigee will sink her in the night and call it natural deterioration. And because she touched the hull like it was a living thing. Because Noah's last message came from inside this boat. His DNA is down there somewhere. The truth of what happened is down there. I can't let that drown," I understood. Duty doesn't always make sense from the outside. Agnes tested the boarding ladder, then climbed. I followed, my hands finding the same rungs hers had, decades of rust and rope, leaving grit in my palms. We pulled ourselves over the rail onto the Nightjar's deck. Standing on the boat felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. The deck was clear, gear stowed, nets folded, everything shipshape. But there was a stillness to it, a sense of interruption. Like we'd stepped into a photograph taken mid-action before the shutter closed. "Wheelhouse is sealed," Agnes said, pointing to a cabin door secured with a Coast Guard evidence tag. "They took what they wanted, logbook, radio, Carver's personal effects. But they missed the important stuff, which is, follow me." She led me along the starboard rail to a low hatch I hadn't noticed, built into the deck near the mast, painted to blend with the planking. Agnes produced another key. "This lock opened smoothly, well-maintained. The black box bay," she said. "Every commercial fishing vessel is supposed to have one. Data recorder, GPS log, sonar archive." The Coast Guard checked it during their investigation, but they were looking for evidence of mechanical failure. They weren't looking for what the Nightjar was doing before the distress call. The hatch opened onto a ladder, descending into the forward hold. Agnes went first. I climbed down into a space that was part equipment locker, part server closet. The walls were lined with waterproofed housing units, cable bundles running to a central console. Status LEDs blinked in the darkness, green, green, green. Still powered, still recording. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Jesus," I whispered. "This is a lot of data infrastructure for a fishing boat. Perigee paid for it. They wanted documentation of their test harvests. Probably thought they'd control the narrative." Agnes ran her hand over one of the drive bays. "But equipment doesn't lie. It records what it records." I examined the console. 6 drive bays, each labeled with a metallic tag. 5 were empty. The 6th held a drive with a data ribbon trailing from it, tagged Sun 923B. "They pulled the other drives," Agnes said. "Coast Guard took them during the investigation, but they missed this one. It was hidden in a dummy bay behind the primary slots. Carver's insurance. Against what? Against Perigee deciding he knew too much. I carefully disconnected the Sun 923B drive, wrapping it in a static bag I found in the console's supply drawer. This was evidence. Chain of custody mattered. If this went to court, every step had to be documented. "There's more," Agnes said. We moved aft, deeper into the hold. The smell changed. Less machine oil, more organic. brine and something metallic. The hold opened into a larger space, and my lantern found the sealed forward compartment Agnes had mentioned. It was a pressure door, the kind used for temperature-controlled cargo. A digital thermometer mounted on the bulkhead read 37 degrees. The door had 6 locking bolts and a maintenance log clipboard hanging beside it. The last entry was dated 14 months ago. Specimens secure. Maintain temp 35 to 40 degrees. Do not open without authorization. What's in there? I asked. I don't know. I've never opened it. Agnes touched the door like it might bite her. But whatever it is, Perigee wanted it cold and contained. We searched the rest of the hold. In a locked cabinet mounted behind the ladder, I found a crew locker. Inside, waterproof bags with personal effects, a phone charger, a paperback novel, and a red knit watch cap, the kind fishermen wear with the initials NV marker penned inside the brim. Agnes took the cap with shaking hands, said nothing, pressed it to her face. Beneath the cap was a laminated sheet, crew safety roster. 3 names, Carver, no avail, and a third name that made my stomach clench, Thomas Ray, current employment, Perigee Fisheries, Marine Assets Division. They had a Perigee employee on board, I said. This wasn't a contracted job. This was corporate supervision. Agnes looked up from the watch cap. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steel. They were making sure Carver did what he was told. And when Noah took that photograph, when he threatened to call the Coast Guard, she didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. That's when we heard it. A sound from somewhere deep in the boat. Mechanical, rhythmic. Click, click, click. Not a pump. Not the tide. Something counting down. That's not supposed to be here, Agnes said. We followed the sound to a bilge access panel. I pried it open with a pry bar from the tool rack. Inside, nestled among the pumps and through hulls, was a device I recognized from my salvage work. A motion-activated beacon. Battery-powered, waterproof, designed to broadcast location data when triggered. The LED was blinking red. Active. Someone armed this, I said. Recently, Agnes's face went pale. The hatch. When we opened the hatch, we triggered it, which means someone's monitoring. The sound of an engine cut through the chamber. Not the deep rumble of a working boat. The high, efficient purr of something fast and new. We looked at each other. Company, Agnes said. Through the porthole I saw a light cutting through the fog. A vessel approaching the dock. Sleek, dark, purpose-built. A rigid, inflatable boat. The kind private security uses. They'd been waiting for someone to open the Nightjar, and now they knew we were here. The man who stepped onto the dock wore rain-black oilskins that probably cost more than the Nightjar's hull. He moved with the easy economy of someone who'd spent time on boats, but wasn't a fisherman. Behind him, 2 divers in dry suits hauled gear bags. A pilot stayed with the RIB, engine idling. Agnes and I watched from the porthole. We'd killed our lanterns the moment we heard the engine. Silas Cade, Agnes whispered. Perigee Security. He was at Noah's memorial service. Offered condolences like he was pricing a fish. Cade walked the dock like he owned it, checking his phone, making a call. His voice carried across the water, professionally cordial. Yes, we're on site. No, nobody here yet. We'll secure it. He thinks we're still on shore, I said, or he knows exactly where we are and wants us to think we have time. Agnes moved toward the ladder. Either way, we need to get off this boat before those divers get in the water. We climbed back through the black box bay, moving fast but quiet. I had the Sun 923B drive in my jacket pocket, Noah's watch cap stuffed in beside it. Evidence, chain of custody. The words ran through my head like a legal mantra. We were halfway up the boarding ladder when Cade's voice stopped us. Good morning. You must be the municipal representative. He stood on the hidden ledge, perfectly positioned, hands in pockets, smiling like we'd bumped into each other at a coffee shop. June Mercer, I said, climbing the rest of the way up. No point pretending otherwise. I own this dock as of yesterday, and you're trespassing. Silas Cade, Perigee Fisheries Marine Asset Recovery. He produced a laminated card. We're here on a hazard abatement order. This vessel has been deemed structurally unsound and poses a pollution risk. We're authorized to remove it. Authorized by whom? Cape Thorne Municipal Insurance Carrier. He pulled a folded document from his jacket. All very legal. We just need to perform a final inspection before removal. I took the document. Read it. The language was slippery, lots of may and upon consultation and within discretionary authority. It wasn't a court order. It was a suggestion with a corporate letterhead. This isn't binding, I said, and it predates my ownership. As of 9 a.m. yesterday, this dock and everything moored to it falls under my custodial authority, which means you need my permission to be here. Cade's smile never wavered. Ms. Mercer, I appreciate your diligence, but this vessel is a hazard. We're here to make it safe. Surely you want that? What I want is proper filing with the harbour master. I held up the document. Captain Rafi Calderon needs to log any salvage or removal action. Until then, this boat stays exactly where it is. We'll file after we secure it. Cade made a gesture, and the two divers moved past us, heading for the Nightjar's hull. Just a quick seacock inspection. Make sure she's not taking on water. She's stable, Agnes said flatly. I've been pumping her for 14 months. Cade looked at Agnes like he was noticing her for the first time. Mrs. Vale, I'm sorry for your loss, but given your personal connection, perhaps it's best if professionals handle this. My personal connection is why I know this boat is evidence, Agnes shot back. And you're here to make sure it sinks before anyone can prove it. Cade's smile finally slipped, just for a second. Then it was back, smooth as oil on water. That's quite an accusation. Do you have proof? I felt the weight of the drive in my pocket. Proof, recorded data. Noah's last message frozen in corrupted pixels. But if I showed it now, Cade would seize it as corporate property. Chain of custody would shatter. The case would die in a conference room, buried under NDAs and settlement checks. I have ownership, I said instead, and a legal responsibility to inventory any salvage before removal. Which means your divers don't touch anything until I file a claim. Cade studied me. The cordial mask was still there, but I could see him recalculating, deciding how hard to push. Ms. Mercer, I understand you're new to Cape Thorne. You don't know the history here. This boat has caused a lot of pain. The best thing for everyone is to let it go. The best thing for everyone is to follow the law. Cade's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then back at me. Whatever message he'd received changed something. His posture shifted, became less accommodating. We'll file with the harbour master, he said. After we finish our inspection. My divers need to check the hull integrity. No, I'm afraid I must insist. One of the divers was already in the water, pulling himself along the Nightjar's waterline. The other had a tool bag, heading for the sub-cellar entrance. Agnes, I said quietly. How fast does the tide come in? 30 minutes to full flood, she said, understanding immediately. Tunnels will be chest-deep in 20. I looked at Cade, looked at the diver in the tool bag, moving toward the Nightjar's bilge access. Looked at the RIB pilot on the dock above, now joined by a fourth person, a slight figure in a hoodie, carrying a laptop case, the data technician. Here to wipe the drives we'd already pulled. You've got 20 minutes to finish your inspection, I told Cade. Then the tide locks this chamber until the next cycle. Your choice whether you're on this side of the door or the other, Cade smiled. We'll work quickly. As we climbed back toward the hatch, Agnes leaned close. There's another way out. Tide tunnels. They run under the pilings to the lighthouse. Water's already rising, but if we move now, we can make it. What about the drives? The evidence? Noor Al-Sayed keeps the lighthouse. She's got tools, radios, dry space. Agnes was already moving, leading me away from the main ladder toward a gap in the pilings I'd missed. And she's got the old fog machinery. If we're going to fight these people, we're going to need cover. Behind us, I heard the sound of tools on metal. The divers were opening the Nightjar's seacocks, scuttling her. Cade wasn't inspecting anything. He was sinking the evidence. I pulled the burner USB from my pocket, the one I carried for field data transfers, and as we passed, the technician hunched over her laptop on the deck. I dropped it at her feet. In case you hate your job, I said. She looked up. Young, maybe 25, face pinched with anxiety. Our eyes met for 3 seconds. Then she looked away, but her hand moved toward the USB. Agnes and I dropped into the tide tunnel. The water was already knee-deep and rising. Somewhere behind us, the Nightjar began to list. The tide tunnels were older than the dock, older than Cape Thorne's incorporation. Hand-cut granite channels that smugglers had used to move cargo from hidden coves to the harbour proper. Agnes navigated by touch and memory, one hand on the slick stone wall, the other holding a waterproof light that barely cut the darkness. The water climbed to our thighs. My legs went numb with cold. "Agnes," I said, trying to keep panic out of my voice. "How far?" 50 yards. "There's a ladder." She kept moving, certain even as the water reached our waists. "Used to come this way as a girl." Thought I was a pirate. The tunnel narrowed. I had to turn sideways, and for a horrible moment I thought we were trapped, that the tide would just keep rising and we'd drown in this stone throat beneath the harbour. Then I heard barking. "Gull somewhere above us. He knows the way," Agnes said. "Follow the sound." The barking echoed off stone, impossible to pinpoint. But Agnes moved toward it with absolute faith, and then my hand found metal. A ladder bolted into living rock leading up. We climbed. The shaft was vertical, tight, slippery with algae. My shoulders scraped both walls. Above, grey light filtered down. The barking got louder. My arms burned. Then Agnes pulled herself over the lip of the shaft, and hands reached down to help me up. I emerged into a circular stone room that smelled of machine oil and salt. Windows circled the space, looking out over fog-shrouded harbour. Brass and glass machinery filled the centre, a massive lens assembly on bearings, surrounded by pneumatic controls and a mechanical timer the size of a washing machine. "Welcome to the lighthouse," said a woman in coveralls, hair tied back with electrical tape. "I'm Noor, you're soaked." Agnes grabbed blankets from the locker. Noor al-Sayed looked like someone who solved problems for a living. She had calloused hands and the focused calm of an engineer. She helped me out of my wet jacket, took the drive from my pocket before the water could reach it. "Black box recorder?" she asked. "From the Nightjar. It's evidence of corporate malfeasance, probably pollution violations, definitely worth killing for." Noor wrapped the drive in a static, safe cloth. "Agnes called me last night. Told me you were the kind of stubborn that shows up to strange auctions. Said I should get the fog ready." "The fog?" Noor grinned. "Let me show you what a decommissioned lighthouse can still do." She led me to the control panel. The lens assembly was connected to a compressed air system, and mounted below it was the largest horn I'd ever seen, a brass trumpet that looked like it could wake the dead. "This lighthouse was retired 12 years ago," Noor explained, "replaced by an automated beacon, but the mechanical systems still work. Foghorn, directional lens. Pneumatic timer that can sequence blasts in any pattern you want." She pulled a lever. The compressor engaged with a deep thrum. The horn released a blast that rattled my teeth, a sound designed to carry for miles, to warn ships in storms, to cut through any weather. When it faded, Noor smiled. "Fog isn't just weather, Ms. Mercer. It's a weapon if you know how to use it. And I can make this harbour as blind as you need it to be." We dried off. Agnes brought coffee that tasted like it was brewed with fog and spite. Noor spread a chart of the harbour across a drafting table, marking positions with a grease pencil. "Cade's RIB is here," she said, tapping the Harrow Point dock. "Current is pulling northeast, fog is rolling in thick. If we trigger the horn in a staggered pattern, 3 seconds north bearing, 5 seconds east, their sonar will read false positions. Make them think they're drifting when they're not. How long can you maintain that?" I asked. "Until the compressor tank empties. 4 hours, maybe 5. Agnes leaned over the chart. "Long enough to reach the harbour master at first light. Calderon's office opens at 6. If June files before Cade can interfere, then the Nightjar becomes official evidence," I finished. "Impounded under chain of custody, untouchable. In theory," Noor said. "In practice, Perigee has lawyers who'll bury any filing in motions. Then we make it impossible to bury." I pulled out my phone, miraculously still functional after the tunnel. "I need waterproof forms, salvage claim documents, and a notary." "I'm a notary," Agnes said. "Got certified after Noah died. Figured I might need to witness something official someday. I started drafting on my phone. Salvage claim. Legal description of the dock. Serial numbers from the black box drive. Testimony of material evidence relevant to ongoing criminal investigation. The words came back to me, muscle memory from 8 years of maritime law. We also need to get back to the Nightjar, I said. There are 5 more drives in that bay, and whatever's in the sealed hold. If we file without full inventory, Cade's lawyers can argue incomplete documentation. The boat's listing, Agnes said. Divers opened the seacocks. She'll be down by the bow in an hour. Then we have an hour. Nor studied me. You're planning to go back out there in fog. With Cade's team actively trying to sink the boat and seize anything you find. Yes, good. She grinned. I like a solid plan. Let me get the horn sequenced. For the next 30 minutes we worked. Noor programmed the foghorn timer, testing blast patterns until she had one that would create maximum acoustic confusion. Agnes drew a chart of approach routes, marking where Cade's team would likely position observers. I finished the salvage claim paperwork, laying out chain of custody with obsessive precision. One problem, Agnes said. Cade knows about me, knows I'm Noah's mother. Any testimony I give, he'll argue bias, which is why I'm the primary claimant, I said. Purchased the dock in good faith. Discovered evidence during lawful inspection of property. Everything by the book. And if Cade just shoots you and dumps you in the harbor, Agnes asked bluntly, then you file the claim. And Noor blasts the horn until the Coast Guard shows up. Noor checked her watch. 4:30 a.m., 90 minutes to dawn. Harbour Master's office is half a mile by water, quarter mile on foot. If we time this right, the radio on the wall crackled. A voice, static distorted. Vessel taking water, requesting pump assistance. We stared at the radio. That was Cade, calling for help, making it look like the Nightjar was sinking despite his best efforts. They're playing the narrative, I said. Tragic accident. Unstable vessel. Nothing anyone could do. Then we'd better get our evidence before there's no boat left to prove it came from. Agnes pulled on a waterproof jacket. Girl, stay. The dog whined but settled by the door. Noor handed me a waterproof case. For the drives. And take this. She passed me a marine radio. Channel 16 if things go sideways. I'll be listening. I clipped the radio to my belt, shouldered the case. Looked at Agnes. Ready? I've been ready for 14 months, Noor threw the switch. The foghorn blasted, once, twice, in a pattern that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Through the lighthouse windows I watched the fog thicken, rolling in dense banks that swallowed the harbor. Go, Noor said. I'll keep them blind. We took Noor's skiff, a flat-bottomed workboat with an electric motor that purred like a sleeping cat. Silent, invisible in the fog. Agnes piloted, navigating by memory and compass, while Noor's foghorn blasts echoed across the water like the voice of something ancient and vast. The Nightjar materialized from the fog, listing 10 degrees to starboard. Water poured from her scuppers. Cade's Arib was still moored to the dock, but I could hear voices shouting, disoriented by the horn. We came alongside the boarding ladder. I climbed first, moving fast. The deck was slick with spray, canted enough that I had to brace myself. The forward hatch was still open. The divers hadn't bothered to secure it. Why would they? They thought the boat was going down. I dropped into the black box bay. 4 drives left. I pulled them all, shoving each into the waterproof case. The bay was tilted, water sloshing through gaps in the bulkhead. The Nightjar groaned around me. Then I heard footsteps above. I froze. Someone was on deck, a voice young and frightened. Miss Mercer, if you're down there, I have something for you. I climbed the ladder. The technician, Tamsin, stood in the companionway holding a drive. Not the burner USB, a cloned copy of the entire system. I couldn't unsee it, she said. The footage. What they made me watch to verify deletion. She thrust the drive at me. This is everything. Full system mirror. Sonar logs, camera feeds, black box telemetry. Including the night Noah Vale disappeared. I took the drive. Why? Because I have student loans, not a death wish. And because I didn't sign up to help people die. She looked at the listing deck. Let's get off this boat. They're going to scuttle it completely. Cade gave the order 5 minutes ago. "The sealed hold," I said. "What's in it?" Tamsin's face went pale. Deep-sea specimens. Trawl bycatch from protected zones. Things Perigee was testing for commercial viability. Things they were supposed to report and release. She swallowed. "One of them is still alive. I heard it." I stared at her. "Show me." We moved aft together. Ignis had come aboard, was securing the other drives. Tamsin led us to the sealed compartment. She entered a code on the keypad. 6 beeps, then a hydraulic hiss. The pressure door opened. Cold air rolled out, dense with brine. Inside, the hold was lined with industrial tanks, most of them dark and still, but one thrummed with circulation pumps. Inside the tank, suspended in cloudy water, was something massive and pale and wrong. A deep-sea cephalopod maybe, or something older. Its skin pulsed with bioluminescence, and mounted on the bulkhead, covered in waterproof housing, a camera. "Still recording. Noah set this up," Tamsin said. "He wanted documentation. Perigee found out. Sent their asset manager, Thomas Ray, to handle it. Where's Ray now? Dead. He was on the boat when Carver had his stroke. Or when Carver saw what Ray did to Noah and had his stroke. The reports are unclear." I pulled out my phone, photographed the specimen, the tanks, the camera, evidence. Then I unplugged the camera's storage drive and added it to the case. The Nightjar lurched. Water roared somewhere below. The list increased sharply. "Time to go," Agnes said. We scrambled for the deck. The skiff was still there. Nor's foghorn blasting in patterns that turned the world into sound and emptiness. We climbed down the ladder, pulled away just as the Nightjar's bow dipped beneath the surface. Behind us, I heard shouting. Cade's team had lost their bearings, were trying to regroup. One of the divers surfaced, tangled in his own guideline, panicked by the horn blasts. The veteran diver was screaming at him to stay calm. We ghosted. Through the fog toward the lighthouse, I clutched the case full of drives, full of truth, and watched the Nightjar slip beneath the surface. But we had what mattered. We had evidence. We had testimony. We had a claimant with clean hands and a legal right to everything we'd found. Now we just had to survive until dawn. Dawn came slowly to Cape Thorne, bleeding grey light through fog that wouldn't lift. We'd spent the last hour in the lighthouse preparing for what came next. June sorting evidence into labelled envelopes. Agnes checking sightlines to the harbourmaster's office. Nor calibrating the foghorn for one final massive blast. I had everything. 5 black box drives. Tamsin's system mirror. Noah's camera footage showing Thomas Ray disconnecting safety lines, while a young man in a red watch cap struggled in cargo netting. The specimen tank documentation. Chain of custody forms signed and notarized. All I needed was to walk a quarter-mile to Captain Rafi Calderon's office and file before Cade could stop me. "They'll be waiting," Agnes said, studying the harbour through binoculars. "Cade knows where we are, knows where we're going. He'll have the routes covered. Then we make noise," Nor said. She stood at the foghorn controls like a ship's captain at the wheel. "Enough noise that the whole town hears. Enough that staying quiet becomes harder than speaking up." She threw the switch. The horn blasted. Not a navigation signal, not a warning. A sustained, ear-splitting declaration that shattered the dawn. It went on for 30 seconds, stopped, then again, and again. The pattern was clear. Distress, attention, witness this. Lights came on in houses along the harbour. Doors opened. People emerged onto porches, pointing toward the lighthouse. The fog began to thin, burned off by the rising sun and the sheer force of sound. Below, Cade's RIB moved away from the Harrow Point dock, heading directly for the lighthouse. No more politeness, no more legal theatre. This was a man who'd lost patience. "Here he comes," Agnes said. Cade reached the lighthouse's stone pier and stepped off with 3 others, the 2 divers and another man in a Perigee jacket. They moved like they'd done this before. "Secure the perimeter. Control the asset. Clean extraction." Nor hit the horn again. The blast was so close it hurt. But it did something else too. It brought people. Fishermen walked down to the harbour, curious. A few dock workers gathered at the public pier. Even the town's small harbourmaster's office showed lights. Cade saw what was happening, saw the audience gathering. His expression hardened. A truck pulled up near the lighthouse. An old Ford with a church logo on the door. A man in his 60s climbed out, collar visible under his coat. Reverend Jonah Pike. I'd read about him in my research on Cape Thorne. Community leader, organizer of relief funds. The voice people listened to when decisions mattered. He walked toward Cade, hands raised in a peacekeeping gesture. Silas, what's happening here? People are frightened. Nothing to worry about, Reverend. Just securing an unsafe vessel. Cade's voice had regained some of its smoothness. An audience meant performance. Unfortunately, some well-meaning folks interfered with a hazard abatement. We're just making sure everyone stays safe. Pike looked up at the lighthouse, saw us in the windows. Agnes Vale is up there. She's no troublemaker. With respect, Reverend, Mrs. Vale has been emotionally compromised since her son's death. She's making accusations that aren't helpful, getting in the way of closure. Closure! Agnes's voice carried down from the lighthouse door. She'd stepped out onto the catwalk, visible to everyone. Is that what you call making sure nobody finds out what really happened to Noah? The gathered crowd shifted, murmured. People knew Agnes, knew her loss. This wasn't a troublemaker speaking. This was a mother. Cade's jaw tightened. Mrs. Vale, I understand your pain. We all do. But inventing conspiracies doesn't bring Noah back. It just hurts the community that's trying to heal. Show him, Agnes called to me. Show him what conspiracy looks like. I pulled out my phone, opened the video file Tamsin had cloned, held it up where Pike and the crowd could see. The footage was grainy, shot from a fixed camera in the Nightjar's hold. Timestamp 14 months ago, 11:43 p.m. It showed Noah Vale filming something on his phone, the blurred bycatch image he'd texted Agnes. Then Thomas Ray entered the frame. Words were exchanged, silent on this clip. Noah backed toward the rail. Ray moved forward, a hand on Noah's shoulder, not friendly. Noah shook it off, reached for a safety line. Ray unplugged the line from its davit. The footage jumped, camera jarred by motion, and when it stabilized, Noah was in the water. Ray stood at the rail watching, not throwing a life ring, not calling for help, watching. Then Ray turned toward the camera, realized it was recording. His face went white. He moved toward it, reaching. The clip ended. Silence on the pier. Even Cade said nothing. Reverend Pike's face had gone gray. That's Noah Vale. That's my son being murdered, Agnes said, her voice steady and terrible. And that's Perigee Fisheries, making sure he never testified about what they were catching in protected waters. Pike looked at Cade. Is this real? It's edited footage taken out of context, Cade said smoothly. We'd be happy to have forensics examine. It's time-stamped and verified, I interrupted. Black box data with GPS coordinates and unbroken chain of custody. It shows Thomas Ray, employed by Perigee Fisheries, committing negligent homicide. And it shows Perigee covering it up for 14 months. Pike stared at the phone. At the frozen image of Noah's face in the water. How long have you known about this? Cade shifted tactics. Reverend, think about what you're saying. Perigee employs 70 people in this region. They've supported the food bank, funded the community center, helped families through the cannery closure. If these accusations go public, that all goes away. Winter's coming. People need those jobs. Those donations. It was the right argument. Pike's face showed the calculation. Principle versus survival. Truth versus winter fuel. Then Pike pulled something from his jacket pocket. A ledger. Small, leather-bound, worn from handling. Perigee Relief Fund, he said quietly. I've kept records of every dollar they've given us. Every family they've helped. I told myself it was charity. That they were being good corporate citizens. He looked at the ledger like it was diseased. But this is a ledger of silence, isn't it? We've been paid to look away, to accept the story we were told, to let Noah Vale disappear without asking questions. He threw the ledger at Cade's feet. We've been bought with our dead. The crowd's murmur grew louder, angry. Someone shouted, What else are they hiding? Another voice, My cousin worked those deep runs. Said the quotas didn't make sense. Cade saw control slipping. He gestured to his team. Secure the lighthouse. Get those drives. The divers started forward. Pike stepped between them and the lighthouse stairs. No, not until the harbor master sees this. Reverend, I'm asking you to step aside, and I'm telling you we're done stepping aside. Cade pulled out his phone. Made a call. His voice was low, but I caught pieces. Containment failure. Need authorization for expedited removal? He was calling in reinforcements, or orders to destroy evidence, or both. That's when Agnes raised the flare gun. She didn't point it at anyone. She pointed it straight up and fired. The flare arced into the dawn sky, brilliant red against grey, climbing high enough that every boat, every dock, every office with a harbour view could see it. A distress signal, a legal mandate for response. Under maritime law, Agnes called down, any distress signal requires investigation and documentation. Captain Calderon is legally obligated to respond, and anything he finds during that investigation is part of the official record. Cade stared at the flare, at Agnes, at the crowd that had grown to 30 people, all watching, all witnesses. In the distance I heard sirens. The RIB pilot ran to Cade, whispered urgently. Cade's expression went flat. He looked up at me. You think you've won, he said. You think filing paperwork makes you right. But Perigee has lawyers who eat salvage claims for breakfast. They'll tie this up for years, and Cape Thorne will remember who cost them their winter jobs. Maybe, I said. But Cape Thorne will also remember that someone finally asked what happened to no avail, and whether you're comfortable living in a town where that question isn't allowed. A boat cut through the lifting fog. Coast Guard markings. And behind it, a smaller skiff with a blue light. Harbour master's vessel. Captain Rafi Calderon was coming. Cade saw it too. Made a decision. Get the drives now. His team moved toward the lighthouse. Pike and 3 fishermen blocked the stairs. Cade reached for the diver's gear bag. Probably had a weapon in there. Nor hit the foghorn one last time. The blast knocked everyone back a step. It was deafening, disorienting, pure sound turned into force. The divers covered their ears, stumbled. One lost his footing on the wet stone, tangled his own line, went down hard. By the time they recovered, Calderon's skiff was at the pier. Captain Rafi Calderon moved with the unhurried certainty of a man who'd spent 40 years dealing with harbour crises. He was 60, compact, with weathered brown skin and grey hair cut Coast Guard short. He wore a harbour master's jacket and carried a clipboard. Behind him, Deputy Alma Reyes, younger, sharper, with a body camera already recording, stepped onto the pier with the evidence kit. Someone want to tell me why I've got a distress flare, 30 witnesses, and what looks like a corporate security team on lighthouse property at dawn. Calderon's voice was calm but carried authority. Everyone started talking at once. Calderon raised a hand. Silence fell, one at a time. Ms. Mercer, you filed the lighthouse access permit. You first. I climbed down from the lighthouse, carrying the waterproof case. My hands were steady. This was my element. Not boats or fog or confrontation, paperwork, process, law as lighthouse. Captain Calderon, I'm filing a formal salvage claim on the vessel Nightjar, previously moored at Harrow Point Dock, which I own as of February 3rd. During lawful inspection of said property, I discovered black box data recorders, sonar logs, and camera footage indicating criminal activity, specifically negligent homicide and conspiracy to conceal environmental violations. I opened the case, showing the labeled drives. I'm requesting immediate impound of this evidence and initiation of chain of custody protocols. Calderon took the case, examined the labels. These came from the Nightjar. Yes, sir. Removed during lawful inspection, documented, and secured. Ms. Agnes Vale served as witness. Ms. Noor Al-Sayed provided secure storage. Ms. Tamsin Roy provided whistleblower testimony and technical expertise. I handed him the notarized affidavit. All signatures verified. Cade stepped forward. Captain, those drives are corporate property. Ms. Mercer is interfering with a sanctioned hazard abatement. Do you have court authorization for that abatement? Calderon asked mildly. The insurance company, I asked about court authorization. Do you have a judge's signature? Cade's silence was answer enough. Calderon turned to Alma. Deputy, please photograph these evidence containers. Include timestamps and location data. Alma moved methodically, photographing each drive, each label, each seal. Her body camera captured everything. This was the chain of custody being forged in real time, link by link, witnessed and documented. "Captain, we need to discuss this privately," Cade said. "There are corporate interests. The only interest I have is maritime law." Calderon signed the custody form I'd prepared. "Ms. Mercer has filed a legally valid salvage claim. The vessel in question is no longer present. Deputy, confirm the Nightjar's current status." Alma pulled out a tablet accessing harbor sonar. "Submerged at Harrow Point mooring. 42 feet of water. Hull intact. Salvage status confirmed," Calderon said. "Which means any artifacts recovered from that vessel fall under Admiralty jurisdiction. The evidence Ms. Mercer has presented indicates possible criminal activity, which triggers my authority to impound and investigate." "Those drives contain proprietary business data," Cade insisted. "Perigee will file an injunction. Perigee can file anything they want. Until a judge tells me otherwise, this evidence remains in official custody." Calderon handed the case to Alma. "Deputy, log these into secure evidence. I want full chain of custody documentation." Alma took the case. "Yes, sir." Cade moved toward her. "You can't just—" Alma stopped walking, looked at Cade with eyes that had seen too many emergencies, too many people trying to avoid responsibility. "Sir, if you touch this evidence, you're obstructing a felony investigation." "Step back." Cade's hand hovered near the case. "You could see him calculating. Force, bribery, legal threats." Calderon's voice cut through the calculation. "Mr. Cade, I've worked with Perigee for 20 years. You've been professional, helpful even. But I've also watched 2 harbor masters before me get pressured into looking the other way. I've been disciplined twice for questioning harvest reports. I'm 60 years old and I'm tired of pretending I don't see what I see." He pointed at the case. "That evidence gets logged, analyzed, and submitted to federal investigation. If it exonerates Perigee, great. If it doesn't, that's between you and the prosecutors." "You're making a mistake," Cade said quietly. "Maybe, but it's the mistake I can live with." Reverend Pike stepped forward. "Captain, I'm willing to provide testimony about the Perigee Relief Fund, about community pressure to keep quiet about the Nightjar, about—" He swallowed. "About my own failure to ask the right questions when Noah Vale disappeared." Calderon nodded. "Deputy, take Reverend Pike's statement." Agnes descended from the lighthouse. She held Noah's red watch cap, the one we'd found in the Nightjar's crew locker. She approached Calderon. "Captain, I'm Noah Vale's mother. I'm formally requesting that you include this footage in your investigation." She pulled out her phone, showed him the clip. "That's my son being murdered. I want it on record that I witnessed this evidence, that I believe it to be authentic, and that I'm demanding justice." Calderon watched the clip. His face went carefully neutral, but his hands tightened on the clipboard. "Mrs. Vale, I'm so sorry. This will be included." He made a note. "And I'm going to recommend federal prosecutors review this immediately." Tamsin emerged from the lighthouse where she'd been hiding. She looked terrified but determined. "I can authenticate the data. I'm the one who cloned the system. I can testify to file integrity." Cade's expression darkened. "Ms. Roy, I strongly advise you to reconsider." "I've been reconsidering for 6 months," Tamsin said. "Ever since I watched footage of a man drowning and was told to delete it. I'm done reconsidering." Calderon looked at the assembled crowd, at the evidence, at Cade and his team. "Here's what's happening. This evidence is impounded. Federal authorities will be contacted. Anyone with testimony is welcome to provide it. And the Nightjar site is officially a crime scene. Nobody approaches without authorization." He turned to Cade. "You're welcome to contact your lawyers. But you and your team need to leave lighthouse property, now." "This isn't over," Cade said. "No," Calderon agreed. "It's not, but it started. And that's what matters." Cade and his team left. The RIB pulled away, heading back toward the main harbor. Cade stood in the stern, phone to his ear, calling in the lawyers and crisis managers and all the machinery Perigee would deploy. But they were too late. The evidence was logged. The witnesses had spoken. The paperwork was filed. I stood on the lighthouse pier, watching the sun burn through the last of the fog, and thought about my father, the one who died in a flood rescue, the one whose death made me allergic to hero myths. He'd always said, "Heroes die. Process survives." This wasn't heroism. This was stubbornness and law, and 3 women who refused to let a boat sink with the truth still aboard. But as the sun rose over Cape Thorne, turning the grey harbour gold, it felt like something worth being stubborn for. 6 weeks later, I stood on the Harrow Point dock, my dock, and watched the Nightjar rise from the harbour. The salvage company had worked for 3 days, rigging airbags and cables, pumping her dry section by section. Now she hung in the air, water streaming from her scuppers, barnacles glittering in March sunlight. She looked smaller in daylight, less haunted, just a working boat that had seen too much and held it too long. Alma Reyes supervised the salvage, maintaining chain of custody, even as the boat was lifted onto a transport barge. She'd turned out to be the iron hinge the case needed, meticulous documentation, testimony that survived 3 legal challenges, body camera footage that made it impossible for Perigy's lawyers to claim impropriety. The federal investigation had moved fast. Tamsin's data mirror provided a roadmap. The black box drives corroborated everything. Noah's camera footage, once the forensics lab confirmed it was unaltered, became the cornerstone of a criminal case that was still building. Thomas Ray was dead, but 3 Perigy executives weren't conspiracy charges. Environmental violations, obstruction of justice. The prosecutors were working through layers of corporate structure, like archaeologists excavating a buried city. Cape Thorne was suffering. Perigy had pulled all donations, all funding, all support. The winter had been lean. 2 families had left for better prospects. The community center ran on volunteer heat, but other things were growing. Reverend Pike had organized mutual aid fuel banks, coordinated by Fisherman using Agnes's net shed as headquarters. The town was learning it could feed itself, heat itself, survive, without a corporate patron deciding who deserved help. A crowd gathered to watch the salvage. Different from the dawn crowd 6 weeks ago, quieter, more thoughtful. Agnes stood beside me, Gull leaning against her legs. "They're going to take her apart, you know," Agnes said. "Evidence analysis. Forensic inspection. Won't be much left when they're done. Is that all right?" She was quiet for a moment. "Noah wouldn't want the boat preserved. He'd want the truth preserved. Long as that happens, I can let her go." A truck pulled up, Noors, loaded with equipment. She climbed out, grinning. "Got your message. You're really doing this?" "I'm really doing this," I confirmed. After the impound, after the filings, after the first wave of prosecutor interviews, I'd made a decision. The salvage award, assuming the court approved it, would be substantial. Enough to restart my consulting practice somewhere else. Enough to disappear into comfortable anonymity. But I'd been the outsider who showed up, asked questions, and refused to be quiet. Which meant I'd become part of Cape Thorne, whether I wanted to or not, so I decided to stay. To turn the dock into something useful. A community boat launch. A testing facility for sustainable fishing gear. A place where asking questions was encouraged, not feared, and I decided to endow something else. "The Noah Vale Fund for Safe Fisheries Research," I said, showing Noor the paperwork. 10% of the salvage award, grants for whistleblowers, support for workers reporting violations, legal defense for anyone who chooses truth over corporate pressure. Agnes looked at the papers. Her eyes went wet, but she didn't cry. Just nodded once, firm. He'd like that. He was always talking about making things better, safer. Drove me crazy with his optimism. She smiled. Kid thought he could fix the world 1 boat at a time. Maybe he did, I said. Just took longer than he expected. Noor pulled a bronze plaque from her truck. "Speaking of making things permanent, this came in yesterday." The plaque was simple, elegant. It read, "In honor of those who steered by truth," and below that a list, Noah Vale, 1998-2024. Thomas Ray, whistleblower. "Wait," I said. "Ray?" Noor nodded. "Did some digging." Turns out Ray had been filing internal complaints about Perigy's practices for months before the Nightjar incident. They'd ignored him, threatened to fire him. He was going to testify alongside Noah. That's why he was on the boat that night, not to stop Noah, to help him gather evidence. Agnes stared at the plaque. Then why? Best guess? Something went wrong. Maybe Carver panicked. Maybe there was an accident. The footage shows Ray at the rail, but doesn't show what happened before, nor secured the plaque to a piling. Point is, he tried. Both of them tried. We should remember that. I thought about heroes and myths and people who just did their jobs despite being afraid. Ray would never be redeemed in the public mind. He'd always be the face in the footage, the hand on Noah's safety line. But he'd also been someone who filed complaints and stood up and tried to make things right before it all went wrong. Truth was more complicated than stories. But that was okay. Truth could hold complexity. Myths couldn't. The Nightjar settled onto the barge with a groan of metal and wood. Ulmer signed off on the transport documents. The barge pulled away, heading for the forensics facility in Portland. The crowd dispersed slowly. Some stopped to look at the new plaque. Others nodded to Agnes, to me, to Noor, small acknowledgements. We see you. We remember. Calderon approached, hands in his pockets. Got word from the prosecutors. They're filing additional charges. Money laundering, falsified harvest reports, conspiracy. Looks like this goes deeper than one boat and one night. Will it stick? I asked. Some of it will, maybe not all. But it started. He looked at the plaque. That's what matters, starting, asking questions. Making silence harder than speaking. He walked back to his office. Deputy Reyes followed, ever professional, ever documenting. Agnes turned to me. You know what the hardest part is? Not the grief, not the waiting. The hardest part is learning to live with the answer. Because knowing what happened doesn't bring him back. Doesn't make it fair? No, I agreed. It doesn't. But it makes it mean something. And I can live with meaning. She pulled the red watch cap from her pocket, the one we'd found on the Nightjar, the one that had been returned to her after forensics finished with it. She walked to the plaque and placed the cap at its base. A small memorial, temporary until the next tide took it. For both of them, she said. For everyone who tried. Gull sniffed the cap, then sat, guarding it until the water came. I stood on my 25-cent dock, watching the sun move across the harbor, and thought about what I'd bought. Not splinters, not a problem, but a responsibility, a chance to prove that small debts could open big doors, that paperwork could be a tool for justice instead of a weapon for silence, that showing up and asking questions was sometimes the bravest thing you could do. The lighthouse horn sounded once. Nor testing the new timer sequence. The blast rolled across the water, clear and strong, a voice for the voiceless. I'd come to Cape Thorne as an investigator. Left a big firm, left the disappointment of watching truth get buried. I'd come looking for simple salvage work and found something much harder, a community learning to save itself. But maybe that was the point. Maybe we didn't need heroes. We needed keepers, people willing to maintain what mattered, pump the boats that needed pumping, ask the questions that needed asking, people willing to pay 25 cents and see what doors opened. The fog was rolling in again, soft and grey, wrapping the harbour in its familiar embrace. I walked back to Agnes's net shed, where coffee was waiting, and plans for the community launch were spread across the table. Gull followed, no longer skittish, no longer growling at shadows. Behind us, the plaque gleamed in the fading light, keeping watch over the water, keeping faith with those who steered by truth, and that, I thought, was worth every cent. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.